Labor and the Challenge of Climate Change is a production of U.S. Labor Against the War. This is the first of 3 parts. Part 2 will focus on the concepts of environmental justice and just transition. Part 3 will cover the impact of militarism on climate change. The science may be complex, but the truth is pretty simple.
I'm not a believer in global warming. I'm not a believer in man-made global warming. It'll get cooler, it'll get warmer, it's called weather.
But many scientists warn that catastrophic events will follow once we pass an increase of just 1.5 degrees Celsius. This presentation examines the impact of global warming on glacial and polar ice melt and consequent rising sea levels. Without major reductions in the use of fossil fuels, as much as 2/3 of the world's frozen carbon will be released from melting permafrost. Already, Siberian permafrost has released deadly anthrax virus spores that have been trapped in buried frozen carcasses.
In the extreme ice-bound regions of the Earth, something unprecedented is happening. Everywhere, glaciers and ice sheets have begun breaking apart and accelerating towards the oceans faster than ever imagined possible. How fast will the world's glaciers and ice sheets melt? And what will all that melting mean for us? Since the Industrial Revolution, our burning of fossil fuels has ratcheted up the output of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, which trap heat in the atmosphere. Temperatures are climbing, and the ice is melting faster than ever.
The real questions, the more complicated ones, are how fast are we going to get there? How much is it going to rise? Can we put the brakes on it at any point?
Over the last 40 years, temperatures here in Alaska have risen about 4 degrees Fahrenheit, twice as fast as the global average. Now, these rivers of ice are flowing faster and crashing even more spectacularly into the sea. Alaska's Columbia is one of the biggest ocean-feeding glaciers in North America. In the early 1980s, the Columbia started flowing faster. The Columbia is hemorrhaging ice so quickly that in the last 30 years, the glacier has receded 10 miles up the fjord. In the last year alone, the Columbia lost another half-mile of ice. The consensus is that in the next 50 to 100 years, mountain glaciers almost everywhere will simply disappear. But the biggest cost will be the loss of these huge natural reservoirs of fresh water, water that 1/6 of the world's population depends on. The abrupt collapse of the world's mountain glaciers raises even more disturbing questions about the Earth's biggest tracts of ice. If all of Greenland and Antarctica were to melt, the oceans would rise 200 feet. Global warming is hitting hardest in the Arctic, and all eyes are now fixed on Greenland's ice. Its next move could be the game changer for rising sea levels. Right now, greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere are even higher than they were 125,000 years ago. Higher than they've ever been in the last 500,000 years. Temperatures are already following suit.
There are concerns that we get to some point beyond which strong feedbacks in the climate system kick in and cause changes that we're really unprepared to deal with.
In the next 100 years, the oceans will expand on their own as they warm, accounting for about 1 foot of sea level rise. Another foot will likely come from the loss of the world's mountain glaciers as they melt away. The ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica won't disappear, but their combined melt is expected to add about another foot. The total equals an estimated sea level rise approaching 3 feet or 1 meter by about 2100. It may not sound like much, but over 100 million people live within 3 feet of sea level. Many island nations will cease to exist. The consequences will test our ability to adapt like never before.
600 million people could be affected by sea level rise by the year 2100. 60% of the Earth's population lives within 62 miles of an ocean.
As southern Florida is lost to the sea, other coastal regions will also struggle to hold back the tides.
We've already seen 7 inches of sea level rise in the bay over the past century. We know this because the longest continuously operating tide gauge in America is at the Golden Gate. So we have 154 years of data. We're just now beginning to realize with accelerated sea level rise, we're going to have to prepare and have a new plan for how we deal with it in the Bay Area.
Think of all the wharves and all the places where ships offload and onload all the goods and services. And if sea level rises even 3, 4, 5 feet, every single one of those ports has to be replaced. The cruise ship lines, there are billions of dollars of infrastructure that even a small sea level rise takes out. You got to rebuild it all over again.
Sea level rise produces coastal flooding. As the seas rise, coastal flooding will push further inland. Over the course of this century, these are some of the major U.S. cities that will be significantly impacted by rising sea levels. In addition to rising seas, global warming will produce more frequent superstorms, more killer heat waves, more frequent and longer droughts, more frequent larger firestorms, more crop failures, more widespread famine, more vector-borne disease, and many more climate refugees. A child born today will be 9 years old in 2025, 34 in 2050, and 84 years old in 2100. All this will happen within the lifespan of a child born today. There is a powerful moral argument about why it is imperative that we shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources, our obligation to future generations. How we meet the challenge of climate change will determine the conditions under which our children, grandchildren, and all future generations will live. Our failure to act today will pass the cost on to future generations. The cost of predicted climate change for millennials will be a staggering $8.8 trillion in lifetime income, and tens of trillions for their children. If we want to protect them against the ravages of climate change, we need to make changes today in how we live so that they can live decently tomorrow. Global warming will inflict pain on society many times greater than the dislocation and sacrifice of the transition required to prevent it. Working people understand the concept of intergenerational sacrifice. We make great sacrifices to enable our children to have a better life than we have. The workers and communities impacted by moving to clean energy should not alone bear the social cost of that transition. They should have a voice in planning for a just transition to a sustainable new economy. Our struggle for a just transition is to assure that those sacrifices are shared by all. Those required to make the biggest changes should get the most help. A new script is going to be written one way or another. The question is, who will do the writing? Will impacted workers and their unions be reactive or proactive? Will they let their economic fate be dictated by others? Will they cling to the status quo at the expense of future generations? or will they be agents of change? Remember, nature always has the final word, and nature does not negotiate. This is the end of Part 1. The problem is real and it is urgent. The challenge is huge, but it can be met if we take action now to address it. Watch Part 2, which will be about environmental justice and the concept of just transition. Learn how we can act together to meet the challenge of climate change and global warming. Thanks for viewing this presentation. Please share it with others. Urge your union and other organizations to show it and discuss it. This slideshow is available on the U.S. Law website and on its YouTube channel.